This video describes the Advanced Serpentine System, a method for the fair ordering of board game players for games that are played over multiple rounds. There are three goals for this system. The first goal is that each player's turn order sum is as even as possible. The second goal is that the opportunity for the first player for a round is distributed as evenly as possible. And the final goal is that the system can accommodate any number of players playing any number of rounds. The process for using the system involves stepping through a decision tree to find a set of rules applicable to a given situation. The first question to ask is if the number of rounds is divisible by the number of players. For example, if playing with 5 players, this would mean that the number of rounds being played is 5, 10, 15, and so forth. If this is the case, follow this one rule. Simply pass the first player token once to the left after each round. Common in board games is an item that is passed between rounds that indicates which player is going to start the next round. This is what is meant by the first player token. Let's look at an example using 5 players playing 5 rounds. This may seem like a trivial example, but it's going to help provide the foundation for understanding the rules that are to follow. All right, we have our 5 players, and they're ready to begin a game. In the first round, player A is going to have the first player token, and we'll begin the first round, followed by player B, player C, player D, and player E. For the next round, our rule states that we simply pass the first player token once to the left. We're going to pretend that our players are facing us, so we'll pass the first player token to player B. We're still playing the left, so player C will be next, followed by player D, E, and last, player A. And we continue this for 3 rounds. Now, we've simulated these players playing a 5-round game. There are 2 important takeaways. The first is that each player was able to be the first player for a round once. The second, that each player's turn order sum is equal. For example, player A was the first player in round 1, 5th in round 2, 4th in round 3, 3rd in round 4, and 2nd in round 5. If we sum these turn orders, we get 15, which is the same for all the other players. If we were to double this game by playing 10 rounds, the results would be the same. Everyone was the first player the same number of times, and each player's turn order sum is the same. Now, if the players only played 4 rounds, there's a noticeable difference in the turn order sum. For example, player D's turn order sum was 10, while player E's turn order sum was 14. This may be considered a disadvantage for player E. It can be noted at this point that player E wasn't given the chance to be first player. However, not enough rounds were played so that each player could be the first player at least once. So as long as the difference between the player who was the first player the most and the player who was the first player the least isn't more than 1, it will be considered acceptable. So how do we address this player order sum discrepancy? One possible solution is the basic serpentine system. You may recognize this from the setup phase of the board game Catan. The system involves reversing the player order each round. So, going back to our 5-player example, we play our first round, and then we reverse the player order. So, player that was 5th would become first, and so forth. And then we would reverse the player order again, and reverse it one final time. Now, the player order sum is even, but the number of round 1's first player isn't. We have our player A and player E switching off being the first player, while all the other players aren't given a chance to be first player at all. Now this can be resolved by advancing the first player token by 2 players every other round. So we played our first round, we reversed the player order, and now we're advance the first player token by 2 and reverse. Now, the player order sums are even, and no player was given the first player 2 more times than any other player. This works for all games with an even number of rounds. So to review so far, if the number of rounds is divisible by the number of players, simply pass the first player token once to the left after each round. If playing an even number of rounds, every round, reverse player order. Every other round, pass the first player token to the left of the player who held it 2 rounds prior. Now, if we are playing a game where the number of rounds is not divisible by the number of players and the number of rounds isn't even, the next question to ask is if the number of players is divisible by 4. This would be the case if we were playing, say, an 8-player game with 7 rounds. So let's read the rules for this one. After the first round, pass the first player token to the left the number of players equal to half the total number of players. After the second round, pass the first player token to the left. Every following round, reverse player order. Every other following round, pass the first player token to the left of the player who held it 2 rounds prior. The first time that round 1's first player would be passed the first player token from round 1's second to last player, skip this player, and instead pass it to round 1's third player. On the last round, reorder the players to even out their turn order sums. Ties are broken in favor of the player who went later the previous round. Notice that our serpentine rule is present here as this rule right here. Now, there are special considerations for the first, the second, and the last round, as well as another rule to keep in mind should it occur. All right, 8 players, 7 rounds. So after the first round, we're going to pass the first player token to the left the number of players equal to half the total number of players. We're playing with 8 players. Half of that is 4. So we pass the first player token 4 players to the left. Now, our next rule states that we pass the first player token to the left. Now we begin our serpentine that we're familiar with from the rule for when playing with an even number of players. Reverse the player order. Now, normally, we would pass the first player token to the left, but remember our special rule. This is the first time that round 1's second to last player would pass the first player token to round 1's first player. So we skip this player and instead pass it to the first player, pass the first player token to round 1's third player. Reverse player order. Now in this final round, we're going to reorder the players to even out their turn order sums. Ties are broken in favor of the player who went later in the previous round. Both player D and player H have the highest turn order sum so far, so they'll be going earliest this round, and it's a tie. Player D went 7th in the previous round, while player H went 3rd. So player D gets priority, followed by player H. And we do this again for players C and G, who have the next highest turn order sum. Player C went 8th, player G went 4th, so priority is given to player C. Player B and player F now have the tie for the highest. Player F went 5th, and player B was first last round. So priority is given to player F, followed by player E. And finally, players A and E. Our turn order sums now are as even as we can possibly get them. And no player was first player 2 more times than any other player. Unlike when playing an even number of rounds, playing with odd number rounds is going to require reordering the players in the final round. Notice how the round starts with player D, and then jumps over to player H, then jumps back to player C. Later, we'll discuss some methods for facilitating this change in player order, besides simply having the players stand up and change seats. Going back to our decision tree, we're still playing with an odd number of rounds, not equal to the number of players. Let's say we're playing with 6 players, and let's make this a long game. Let's say that we're playing 13 rounds. 6 is not divisible by 4, but it is even. So we'll follow this set of rules, which is the same as the previous set of rules with one slight difference in the first rule. After the first round, pass the first player token to the left, the number of players equal to 1 less than half the total number of players. Let's try it out. So 6 players. And we are playing with 13 rounds. First round. All right, after the first round, we're going to pass the first player token to the left, the number of players equal to 1 less than half the total number of players. We're playing with 6 players, half of that is 3, 1 less than that is 2, so we'll pass the first player token 2 players to the left. Then we pass 2 to the left in the next round. And we begin our serpentine process by reversing the player order. It's the first time that round 1's second to last player would normally pass the first player token to round 1's first player. So following our rules, we'll skip this player and instead pass the first player token to round 1's third player. We continue our serpentine by reversing the player order. Pass 2 to the left. Reverse. Round 9. Pass 2 to the left. Now, we don't do any special passing on this one because we've already done that special pass once. So we will indeed pass it to the first player. Reverse. Pass 2 to the left. And reverse. All right, we reached our final round. Now we're going to reorder it based on turn order sum and resolve the ties. So player F has the highest turn order sum, so they'll get priority. We have a tie with 43. Player E went later the previous round, so they'll get priority. We have another tie. Resolves in favor of player D. And player C will be last. All right, success. Our turn order sums are as even as possible, and no player was the first player 2 more times than any other player. All right, going back to our decision tree, we only have 2 options left. Our last question to ask is going to encompass most of the rest of the situations. There are 3 parts of this question. The first part, if 1 plus the number of players is divisible by 4, So this would be the odd numbers 3, 7, 11, 15, 19, and so forth. Let's give it a shot with 7 players and 13 rounds. Notice that this set of rules is the same as the previous 2 sets of rules, except for a small change in the first rule. Pass half the total number of players rounded down. Let's give it a shot. Seven players, 13 rounds. There's our first round. Now we pass the first player token. Half the players count rounded down. We're playing with 7. Half of that is 3.5. Rounded down is 3. 1, 2, and 3. Pass 2 to the left. And we begin our serpentine by reversing. It's the first time that we have our situation for the special pass, so we'll go ahead and take care of that now by passing it to player 3. Reverse. Pass 2 to the left. Reverse. Pass 2 to the left. Reverse. Pass 2 to the left. And reverse. All right. It's our last round, so we'll reorder. And there are going to be no ties in this example to resolve. All right. Now let's look at the second part of the question. If the number of rounds is greater than the number of players, playing with 5 players wouldn't fulfill this first part of the question, but we can fulfill the second part of the question if we were playing with 9 rounds. Let's try it out. 5 players, 9 rounds. So, first round, after our second round, we're going to pass half of 5 is 2.5, rounded down is 2. So 1, 2. Pass 2 to the left. And we begin our serpentine process by reversing the player order and passing 2 to the left. Reverse. Pass 2 to the left. And reverse. Normally, we would perform our special pass to round 1's third player, since we're passing it from the round 1's second to last player. But since it's the final round, we're just going to reorder instead. All right, and now the third part of the question. If the number of rounds is less than p plus 5 divided by 2, where p is the number of players. All right, spoilers. These are the only situations that fall into the final otherwise set of rules. So an example that would still fall into this penultimate set of rules is 5 players playing 3 rounds. So the number of rounds is divisible by the number of players. No, 3 is not divisible by 5. Are we playing an even number of rounds? No, 3 is an odd number. Are we playing with a number of players divisible by 4? No, 5 is not divisible by 4. Are we playing with an even number of players? No, 5 is not even. Is 1 plus the number of players divisible by 4? No. 6 is not divisible by 4. The number of rounds greater than the number of players? No, 3 is not greater than 5. The number of rounds is less than this formula. Well, 5 plus 5 is 10, divided by 2 is 5. Is 3 less than 5? It sure is. Let's give it a shot just to check. 5 players, 3 rounds. And since the first 2 rounds are going to be the same, I'll go right into the last round reordering. Okay, now let's grab one of these examples that don't satisfy any of our questions. Let's take 9 players, 7 rounds. Now, this set of rules is the same as the previous set, except our special pass rule is slightly different. The first time that round 1's last player would be past the first player token from round 1's third to last player, skip this player and instead pass it to round 1's third player. Let's give it a shot. All right, 9 players, and we are playing with 7 rounds. After our first round, we're going to pass half of 9 rounded down to 4. Pass 2. Reverse. All right, round 5. Now our super special pass rule comes into effect. The first time that round 1's last player would be past the first player token from round 1's third to last player, skip this player and instead pass it to round 1's third player. Reverse. And it's the final round reordering time. All right, we're done. The player order sums are as even as we can get them. Actually, they're completely even. And no player was the first player 2 more times than any other player. So now we have a system for ordering any number of players playing any number of rounds in such a way that their player order sums are as even as possible and that the opportunity for first player for a round is distributed as evenly as possible. Now let's talk about this reordering that occurs in the last round. Every time that there's an odd number of rounds that isn't divisible by the number of players. It's understandable to be deterred by this gaming inconvenience because even if you're interested enough to wade through these calculations, it may just not be feasible for the players to stand up and rearrange themselves, especially if there are individual player boards involved. So here are 4 possible alternatives. A player turn order tracker could be used, such as the one from the board game Tower of Babel. Each player could place in front of them a number card to indicate their order. A deck could be built with cards for player colors. When a player's turn is done, they take their card, move it to the bottom of the deck, and pass the deck to the color on top. A remote-controlled puck light could be used in a similar way. This one can be operated with 4 controllers. If these are placed between players, 4 controllers can accommodate up to 8 players without the need to dedicate a specific person to keeping track. All right, that's all I got.